Hey there. Today I wanted to look at 5 questions you should ask yourself before retirement. I think by analyzing all these, you'll be setting yourself up for a successful retirement. The first one right off the bat is the biggest one. Do I have enough money to retire? This is obviously the most obvious question, but it's also one of the most complicated and challenging ones for people to figure out. And I think there's a lot of things that go into this. So, first thing, you might want to look at what your withdrawal rate's going to be. So what can you take out of your accumulated assets? 4% is a commonly cited figure. So you would take a 4% withdrawal out of your assets the first year. You would adjust that for inflation each year. And that's usually a pretty good rule of thumb that's worked in a lot of different environments historically, but that assumes that you have a reasonable investment allocation and you're not doing anything silly. So if you have enough assets to hit that 4% withdrawal rate, that's usually a good place to kind of start. You're also going to want to look at your spending needs, and obviously that's going to go into whether that withdrawal rate was appropriate. I find a lot of people misunderestimate their spending needs. Common rule of thumb is take about 80% of your former salary or your former income and expect to spend that in retirement. That's just a very rough starting point, though. I like to have people look at what did you make the last, say, 2 or 3 years, and what did you actually save during that period? So let's say you had an income of $200K and you were able to save $20,000 into retirement and other accounts. And that was an after-tax $200K, let's pretend. That means you spent about $180K. A lot of people in that kind of scenario I find will say, oh, I think I spent $120. And it's like, well, what happened to that $60,000 differential? So that's a great way to kind of look at what your true spending was. I know personally, the kind of retirement I want to have, I don't think I'm going to spend less in retirement. I hope I spend more. I want to be traveling. I want to be out golfing and going to nice dinners and visiting people and all that kind of good stuff. Another factor is your investment plan. I think you need to make sure you've got you've thought out what a good portfolio allocation is and what kind of investments you should have that are going to help you achieve your goals and those retirement needs. Another consideration under the do I have enough category is going to be what are going to be your income sources in retirement? Are you going to be pulling from tax advantage retirement accounts like IRAs? Are you going to pull from just other savings accounts? Do you have a pension? What amount of Social Security are you going to take? When are you going to take Social Security? And thinking through all those kind of strategies. So we covered wealth. The next thing is your health. Do you have a plan for your health? According to Fidelity, they've estimated that a married couple age 65 will spend $315,000 on their health needs in retirement. That is obviously a big, big figure, and that does not take into account long-term care. So if you're 65 or older, your health consideration is primarily going to be, you're going to be looking at Medicare. Now, that's not always simple. You've got parts A, B, D, figuring out how that works with where your income level's at and your health needs. For those under 65, looking at an earlier retirement, you're going to be going, unless you have a spouse still working who you can get insurance through, you're going to be looking at marketplace insurance or private insurance. And that is going to be very, very expensive. So that's something you got to make sure you take into account. Also, under the health category, I would look at what's your family history of longevity. A big portion of how long we live is genetic. And, one of my favorite investors is a guy named Irving Kahn, who's passed away. But him, his brothers, a bunch of his sisters, aunts, uncles, they all lived to 105, 110 years old. Amazing longevity genetics. If you think you're going to be in that bucket, you may need to plan appropriately. Would also consider what kind of health condition you're in, if you have a family history of illnesses that might require some form of long-term care. Do you think it's possible you or a spouse might end up in a nursing home at some point, especially for an extended period of time? And what do you need to do to take that into account for your retirement plans? So health and wealth, those are kind of the big two. But then there's some things I think people don't always think about enough. How are you going to spend your time? So many people, I think, derive a lot of meaning and fulfillment from their jobs. And there's usually a kind of a honeymoon period in retirement. People are very happy to be out of the 9-to-5 grind. But after a certain period, usually, 5-6 months, something like that, the honeymoon period's kind of over and people settle into that day-to-day routine. For some people, it's great, but for some people, there's kind of a falling off of happiness. They find, oh, I'm not as social as I thought. I'm not around people as much. Maybe I'm feeling a little bit lonely. So I think you just want to consider what you're going to do with your time. What are your passions? What are your hobbies? Who are you going to be around? what are your goals and dreams? How are you going to stay physically and mentally active in retirement? How are you going to maintain and expand your social network? I think these are all just things that you want to take into account. Another factor, kind of in the same vein, is how are you going to coordinate with your spouse or your partner? I think it's a big adjustment, especially if one spouse was already at home, for the other spouse to be around 24/7. You could insert all kinds of jokes here, but it does cause problems sometimes. And I think it's something you're going to have to think about. Maybe they don't want you around 24/7. Maybe you guys got to figure out different things that you can do either together or separate that work well in your life. How are you going to share household responsibilities? How are you going to balance your needs? How are you going to communicate those expectations? How are you going to support each other? Just something to take into account. And finally, do you have a plan for your legacy? So retirement's not only that time to enjoy the fruits of your labor, but also kind of think about the legacy you want to leave behind. And whether that's for your family or your community or the world, this is your opportunity to kind of think about how you can leave a positive impact and leave your lasting mark. So, do you have an estate plan in place? What kind of organizations do you want to get involved with? Just all factors to consider. So I hope you found this helpful today. My name is Scott Caulfield. I am the founder of Sophos Wealth Management. I'm a CPA and CFA charter holder. Appreciate it if you could love it if you'd subscribe, and thanks a lot for tuning in today.